Hello, hello, hello.
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 Testing, testing. Okay.
Hello out there. Can you hear us today?
So far, so good.
Right. You can also see people in the room because we actually have the owl on. And let the record state that Dr. Gillespie had me all set up last time and he checked in and I said, no, we're good. And then he went off to do something very important and apparently we weren't good. So it was not his fault. That was my fault. Hey, we are here. We are gathered. It is a little after 3, so we are ready to start another session of our CAN Advisor Read. We're still working through this manifesto for change, the post-pandemic pandemic institution, or he says liberal arts college, the authors do, but we're just talking about in general what it means for us. And we did all of that setup work last time. And Dr. Stacey Elder is still here hoping that there's going to be a full-on revolution. And that we're going to take down the neoliberal regime. But essentially our authors gave us 3 ways that they think we need to fix higher ed and how maybe the pandemic pushed us even more in that way. And we have Dr. Jeffrey Stoll with us today, who's going to talk about the classroom environment and learning environment. And I'll just turn it over to him and we'll have a good discussion and I'll try to watch the chat.
Thank you, Danny. I think I'm actually going to move a little closer and others want to do the same. We can have a little more of a discussion. Actually, I think I know most of you, but maybe we could, I see Holly, Tania, and my Jerry Cat, I know those as well. I know Greg, I don't think I've met you before. What's your name?
Jesse Shoemaker, I'm the director for accessibility and accommodation.
Okay, I've heard the name. Nice to meet you, Jesse. And
Jen King with athletics.
yeah, that's right.
Yeah, you've seen my new emails.
Yeah, I get lots of those. Yeah. First of all, I'm gonna probably exclude the last part of this section that is about the financial piece that, you know, kind of above my pay scale and how we're gonna solve
I
it.
think it's about there.
That's some interesting ideas. I will acknowledge that. And maybe some of them will be fruitful, but because this is focused mostly on things that we do in the classroom. I know some of you teach, maybe all of you have at some point. And so I'm more interested in having a discussion about, you know, what the pandemic kind of has brought us to, and how it changed maybe the way we teach and what we do in the classroom to keep students engaged. Because there seems to be, I feel, maybe a lack of engagement, maybe lingering effects from the pandemic. But we see in faculty too. So the first question, I have a lot of questions, and we can talk about them, each of them as much as you'd like. The first one is, how did the pandemic change the way you teach? And I'm not just talking about online. How did it fundamentally change what we do in the classroom or outside the classroom? How did it affect maybe your teaching or the teaching that you're aware of in our classrooms?
I keep hearing about students who are not prepared to re-engage responsibly, that they got a big break during the pandemic, you know, like, oh, you're stressed out right now, you don't have to turn that in, you can turn it in later. So they don't think deadlines mean anything anymore. I know even in a class like the University Foundation's EIU 1111, it feels like you have to spend time establishing that, no, I put that day on the syllabus for a reason, and what capacity you have to allow or not allow any kind of extension on assignments and things like that.
I think that has become an issue. I see it more even this semester as I'm trying to wrap up the semester. Students are like, oh, they didn't do it. You know, if you were to still do it, there's maybe a chance, you know, otherwise you would be taking this class. So I've heard of others who have maybe been more flexible in their deadlines, maybe structuring the course such that, you know, you might have recommended deadlines and be a little more open to letting students who, as I think increasingly have mental health issues that we're seeing, and just craziest things that happen in their lives that are justifiably, you know, need to be accommodated, I think. But it's creating more workload, I think, for instructors to have to handle some of that. So it's a challenge.
So I had always sort of seen myself as someone who cared about the whole person, right? But I didn't know what that really meant until we went online, and suddenly I'm having meetings with students who are sitting in their houses, and I can see into their private spaces, and I can see, you know, a glimpse into the world that they're living in. And I don't think that I've come back from that experience, even though I don't teach that way anymore. Like fall 20 was the last time I had to do synchronous online, where if the camera was on, I could actually see them sitting at home, right, or in their dorm residence hall or what have you. That has been a big change because I think it's not as much that they think that the deadlines don't matter. I think they're really struggling with deadlines. Their lives are so different now. I mean, when you have students saying, my mom is dying, right, during the pandemic, right? That's like, I've had students tell me my brother was shot, right? Like that had happened before, so it wasn't entirely new, but to have a whole generation of students, you know, living that experience was really different, and I don't think you come back from that.
I think also to that, like, during that first go in spring, time was not a thing. Like, it was the everyday of nothing over and over and over. So how do you get them to come back to, it's not nothing, there's always something, and getting structured again, and you know, not just mindlessly binging this series or doing things like that, that was so easy to do in April of 2020.
Yeah.
Because that's all we did, like, time was just this thing. And if I woke up at 7 a.m., great. If I woke up at 2 p.m., okay, it doesn't make a difference.
There was a lot of that, and there were also students who picked up extra shifts.
Yeah.
Because
Yeah.
they were needed and they needed the money,
Yeah.
and so then they had no time to,
Yeah.
to do work, so there was a lot of different kinds of things going on.
I see the demand of employment, families,
Mhm.
caregiving. It's really demanding on students. So one thing that I changed, or I guess I left the same because of what I was doing during the pandemic, is I had to be so flexible because I wasn't doing, I still taught in the classroom, but there were those who didn't feel comfortable being in the classroom. And so because I had already taught all of these classes online, I had pre-recorded lectures, so I could just easily make this available. Well, after the pandemic, they're still available, which means that my students could use that material to supplement what they're learning in the classroom, sometimes replace because of those unusual demands that come up. And I just say, well, that's okay. I have something that, you know, you can use to learn that material, it can help you. So I've learned to be a little more flexible that way as well. I used to be really just cautious about, I've read some literature about, you know, should you give them the full PowerPoint lectures or just an outline or nothing? And, you know, the previous literature suggests that, well, it doesn't really help them any to give them full details. And it might even hurt in some instances. So I'm like, oh, I don't want to do that, but now I do.
Yeah.
And that was one thing that's changed in my classes. Right, any other comments on that question?
I just gonna say, I pretty quickly went back to expecting them to be in the classroom. Because the not expecting them to be in the classroom meant that there was a lot of not coming to class, and so having the expectation, but then erring on the side of generosity. So I have been one of the things that I changed was building in frequency, right? So they don't have to worry about if they're out with COVID for a couple of days, it's not gonna affect them. If they're Skyping for, you know, a week or two, then probably that will build up, but they wouldn't do well in the classroom anyway. So I have this weird, like, carrot and stick kind of system.
Yeah.
And with late papers, I have like penalties the further out you go, right? But I always encourage them to hand things in. I hand things in late. I just know that there will be consequences for handing something in late, you know? So anyway.
Yeah, I think they get sometimes too discouraged or think that it's not worth it, but
Yeah,
I mean,
it totally is.
even a maximum of 80% is more than max zero.
Exactly.
I think also the confusion part is some people were doing that and others were like,
Yeah.
Yeah.
and they're like, boop, boop. I'm like, did you not, you gotta know. So if I know a class is that way, I say, look, they do not take late stuff. I just want you to let you know, if you're having trouble in this class, it's because you're not turning things in on time. You gotta get, and I mean, you gotta work that to where you know, and not to take advantage, but just if something does come up that they know, this person's not, or this class is really struggling for that. And I think having more of a range of how people deal with late work and things is kind of a struggle for them, because it's almost like black and white.
Mhm.
And there's not, but there's a whole bunch of gray. So to have them kind of be able to adjust to that, because I think before the pandemic, I think deadlines were more, you had to do this or it didn't, and then after we've done through that and seen more of the mental struggles and things like that, that we're giving them more. And it's also, just like a little kid, when you give them more, they try to take more too. So how do you, it's a very tricky line to try to make sure that you're not giving them too much, but not, because there's you, being an advisor, you hear all those stories all the time.
And what an interesting tension too, that you're describing in that, I mean, we hear so many, considerations with compassion from Stacey, and that's not to imply that someone who is stricter on a deadline is not compassionate, but it does create some different experiences, which probably is maybe more what we face when we enter the world of work, is that you will have areas where there's a little give, and there are other areas where there really isn't. And that's the tension I'm describing, that moment when you're like, this is actually what's preparing you for, I mean, like, it's great that you have one professor who's willing to take something late and give you 80%, and another one who says if it's late, it's 0%. So you need to know that and prioritize that, because you have tasks like that in your adult life, but definitely jarring, right? And it's kind of that, like, do I display more compassion, or do I help prepare them for future endeavors? And both are bad.
But, get especially like the freshmen and sophomores that come in, are just, but that's all I can turn it, I can turn it in and get points. No, you can't, did you not, you probably weren't there in the first class, but they went over what that is, or you read the syllabus, so.
And it's offended, they're
Yeah.
offended
Yeah.
if they're not following the rules of the class, or, well, I missed the participation points because I wasn't there. Well, why weren't you there? It's noted in the syllabus that you need to be there and be accountable. And so I've had that where they are miffed that they're losing participation points when it's not the instructor's fault, it's their fault.
Yeah, I mean, as advisors, like I just had a conversation earlier today, as we look ahead to summer orientation and with the new group of first-year students, like, how do we set that expectation of, there will be deadlines. You need to know kind of what, each class may have their own policies, but there will be some expectations that, it's not just a suggestion in a lot of classes. Maybe in some it will be, but in a lot it won't be. And so you really need to know, what does the syllabus say? What does that professor say? And just kind of setting that expectation for, if you only take one thing away from our presentation this summer, it's you have to turn work in order to get credit for it. And that's kind of where it's at right now. So just kind of a new place to be.
It does seem like that would be a thing.
We do that too, it's, go to class, turn in your work, period.
Yeah.
Simple, it's like you can pass pretty much anything if you just go to class and hand it in, and then if you want a higher grade, you do more work. You do more, just go to class. So that is consistent for, I think, anybody, regardless of whether they're the generation coming in now or they've been here for 4 years.
I think the expectation is really important, because I remember taking my first college level course, my instructor suggesting that we read something for the next time, and I took it as a suggestion. And guess what, he gave us a test on it, and so that was, I learned pretty quick. It's like, oh, I need to listen to what he said and what he expects. So I think that can be really helpful as you transition, because, to be honest, I have 6 kids who've gone through this education, and And it seems like there's not a lot of consequences for lateness, until they get to college maybe. So there's some transition there. Expectation for that.
Definitely.
I think it's interesting with like content-based education and those kind of things, like my daughter's in 8th grade now. And I'm like, well, when is that due? "Oh, there's not really a due date, I can just, which is fine, because that's how they're learning, but I'm like, that's not, that's not,
Yeah.
it's always gonna work. Luckily, she has kind of a combination of both of that, of when, you know, and she's really good. She's, oh, I got it done. I never have to even ask her, because she always has it done. But I can see kids that just take that, well, I don't have to turn it in. I can turn it in the very last day, but
Well, what a great skill to learn.
yeah.
You have a task to do and you just need to get it done. And nobody is like making you do it by, like, I like that.
If they take it, see, like with my daughter, that's fine. She takes it, she does it, but I know there's some that are just like, well, it's not due, so I'm gonna play. I'm gonna play on the phone until
I'm not sure I would.
Jeff, we have a comment in the chat from your colleague and friend of the show, Dr. Doolabon, who talks about, you know, if assignments are interactive and incremental, sometimes it's not possible to accept late work,
Yeah,
right? That is kind of the point of the assignment. And this will probably touch on a theme that is also in your notes in terms of we know that they lost social interaction, right? And so how do we try to get them used to interacting and working with people again? And sometimes it could be through assignments like Dr. Doolabon was talking about.
I don't know if anyone else, but the amount of times where I tell a student like, hey, go talk to the professor. Okay, well, I emailed them. No. Go to the office and speak words in person to another human, and you could see the color drain out of their face.
Yeah.
And it's just terrifying. And it's like, okay, this is how it's gonna go. And we're gonna do this and then this and this. You're gonna walk in. It's like you have to guide them through. Here's how your conversation's gonna go. Your professors are not scary. It's gonna be fine. So it's like that human interaction. They just don't, they're terrified of it. Forget not knowing how to do it. It's a terrifying prospect of having to speak to an adult in person, because it's so foreign of a concept.
Yeah, I've noticed, without ways in the classroom to encourage it, students won't talk to each other because they'll, you know, before class, they're on the phones, you know, scrolling. And so I actually take advantage of some of that time to say, okay, we're gonna talk to each other. I actually give like a conversation starter. What was your favorite childhood fad or something? And it gives them a chance just to talk to each other, and I think that's important, to feel a little more connected with each other and just isolated in their seat. Not talking. So that's an important skill. All right, so part of this chapter talked about active learning, and even in the beginning, it talks about each of the authors' experiences about, in one case, learning about the dictators in South America in the 60s and 70s. And fortunately, they didn't go full blown into a Philip Zimbardo prison study, psychology, if you've heard of that, but they did have a very engaging experience and meaningful experience. And then the second author talked about, I said it kind of more like a haunted house, existential learning experience, which was also sounded very engaging. Brought them together, very interesting. So, I actually participated in one of the faculty learning communities this last year on active learning, which I think these are excellent examples of that. But are there ways that you've seen in the classroom, ways to get students actively engaged instead of just the passive lecture? So any examples of active learning?
I was thinking put somebody on the chat planner. I'll go and then maybe somebody on the chat has something. Brian Mann and I in the history department both use a pedagogy called Reacting to the Past, which is a role-playing game pedagogy, and there are lots of games out there that have been peer reviewed, and there's a React to the Past consortium at Barnes College, and it puts students in a historical scenario, and each student is like D&D, and then the student has a roll sheet, and they have to play towards their victory objectives using primary sources and secondary sources. And for my World War I class, we did the July Crisis game, where everybody is one of the states, involved, there, an actual human being who had been involved in the diplomatic crisis in July. Anyway, so there are lots of games like that. And that like transformed my teaching when I started using those games, because it puts the students at the center of the classroom. Once the game starts, you're no longer the instructor, you're the game manager. They use Game Master, but I don't like that. Especially since I run it in my human rights class, I'm not using yeah, and so I also get to see students in ways that do things that I would not see them do if I was just standing there lecturing to them. So it has its downside, like you're not doing a lot of coverage of material if you're doing project-based learning. So if there are things that students absolutely have to learn, especially like for accreditation and things like that, project-based learning can be kind of challenging, but I think it is, I think it's the best way for students to get active and get engaged, and then you can really assess what they have been, what they're able to apply.
You have to get comfortable being uncomfortable as you begin that process.
Well, and that was one of the things that they talk about is risk-taking for instructors, but also risk-taking for students. Students need to learn how to take risks, and intellectual risks, and that's what I like about reacting and project-based learning. That makes a mistake, then you turn it into a learning moment. What would you have done? What would you do differently if you could do it over again?
So I have just a few that I use that I think engage students. One of them involves Play-Doh and making brain parts out of Play-Doh, culminating with me eating a very real looking Jell-O brain. And they remember that. But essentially it's kind of like a jigsaw activity where they each take a couple parts of the brain, they make it out of Play-Doh, and then literally we build a brain. I take it apart, they tell the rest of the class what that part does, how to remember what it does, and I start putting it together. And then at the end, I have some dental floss that they can cut right through the center of it and then do a look at the split brain. So, it's one that they like. It takes the entire class still, and it's not like, you know, I could stand up there and say, okay, the hippocampus does this, you know, the amygdala does this, but getting them involved, we move from being the sage on the stage, as it was described, to really more a guide on the side. But it's, I still struggle with, you know, do I need to cover this information, and what's the best way to do it? And when you make it more active, it usually means less content. So that's always a challenge.
But I think they remember the content better when it's activities than just lecturing.
And do you feel like that opens the door for them to be engaged in maybe less engaging times later?
I don't know if a single instance does. I mean, I regularly, almost every day, will also do some peer instruction or at least peer sharing, maybe peer share, where I use some technology to pull the class on some questions. They respond individually, then they turn to a neighbor and share what they think is the correct answer and why. Then we talk about what the correct answer is and further discussion even after that. So they get a chance to talk to each other a lot, but once in a while, I get feedback from instructor evaluation that I didn't like having to talk to somebody. I mean, seriously, it's like, well, and I can understand that, and I don't force them to do it, and some of them strategically sit far enough away from other people that they don't. And I don't know if I should maybe force that more, but it's, for some students, I think it's a real thing, social anxiety. trying to be mindful of that, but. So, I mean, again, the pre-class, the everyday, turning to a neighbor, they get to know people sitting near them pretty well, and I think they're pretty comfortable in the classroom. I try to learn all their names, and so they hopefully feel a little more comfortable approaching me. There's some of them say that. but-
I think relationships too play a huge point in that, part in that. So if you have that relationship and there are some things that you do just need to lecture or things, and then you're doing other things also that they understand that. I think, but if you always just do the same and it's not working, you keep doing the same and it's not working, then that same needs change, because I get a lot of kids that are failing, and I can tell you which classes they're failing, you know, because I know which ones are hard, or which ones they don't do well in. Now, whether that's the content or whether that's how they deliver it, I'm not sure. But I think that's interesting to see where that plays out and how that is different.
Yeah, because if they have a relationship with someone in their class, maybe the next time they see them on the sidewalk down the hall, they're gonna recognize them and remember and maybe strike up a conversation or maybe. Or talk about the class, so instead of just walking.
And that
right
keeps
with their
retention,
phone.
and that keeps retention too. I mean, if you see why people stay here, it's when they have connections with others and the professors and with, you know, staff. I think that's the big, I always tell when I see them, get involved. Whatever, I don't care what you get involved in, get involved, don't stay in the room, because that's what college is about, is getting involved and meeting other people.
So part of that, I think it relates to the chapter where it talked about collaboration between students and faculty. And faculty being willing to get input from students. Which, the last night around the dinner table, my youngest daughter, I said, well, you know, she's not in my class, but she is a student here. I said, you know, if you're not a student of mine, and this is the problem I'm having, which happens to be how to assess student learning in a world of technology, that it's hard to know where they're getting their information. What would be the best way to tackle this problem? I don't think she had a good answer. I didn't have a good answer. I'm still thinking about this issue. But I thought, wow, you know, what if I partnered with a couple of students and said, just come to my class, watch what I'm doing, or read my syllabus, tell me how does it sound, does it sound too domineering, am I communicating what I think I am? And so I do ask students about feedback partway through the semester, and I've used that to make some changes in my courses. But I thought that was a really interesting idea of involving students to more collaboratively in what we're doing in the classroom. Maybe not to be so disconnected from what they're thinking.
I'm teaching a forum class, so intro to biology major and pre-health profession pathways in the fall. And something I thought of toying with after this is not giving them a completely blank syllabus and just saying, here's my blank piece of paper with my contact info. What do you want to learn this semester? But leaving it with open weeks and literally on that first day of class, like, what are you hoping to get out of this? Because I know you don't know what you don't know, but what do you think you should know at the end of this? So I can give them some buy-in on it. And then I'm also toying with the psychology that people respond better to rewards than punishment. So instead of taking away points every time I see them with their phone out, literally saying, if you are willing to set your phone on the front counter every week when you walk in, I will give you 5 points. It just, probably not 5, but I will give you a bonus point every week. So you figure there's how many guests.
Yeah.
Like rewarding them. If you are willing to take this device and have it out of your reach so that you talk to people for the next 5 minutes till class starts, and you're actually engaging with something in this room other than that during the next 50 minutes, I'll give you a point for it. And trying to help them disengage from their electronic and engage with the world immediately surrounding them. Those are my 2 hopes for trying to get engaged students.
I've done the first quarter.
Okay.
And it worked really well. The students were like, you wanna know what I think? But, I do think that if I to do it again, I will, scaffold it more because they were kind of like, I want to do it, but I have no idea what I'm doing. So we have a little bit more guidance of the kinds of things they could choose from, or, I think that might help, leaving it sort of open-ended, but also giving them some direction or resources that they can use.
Well, and you can also talk to your seniors,
Mhm.
you took this, what do you wish you had learned in that class at that time
Mhm.
that you didn't learn until 2 years later, that would have been better to know, because then that could structure some stuff, or if the class is stuck, you would have some suggestions of, here's some topic areas we're going to cover. So it gives a chance for them to kind of build off of that.
But I think even in upper division classes, that could be something that's implemented, like what are you coming into this class expecting to learn by the end? And that could be a topic that maybe as the expert in that subject area, you would assume they knew that, but, oh, no, you are expecting me to bring that to you, and that can help engage and also help us understand where are they, like meeting them where they are. So that may be wishful thinking of upper divisions, but.
Well, I mean, even in my upper division class, first day of class, I asked for 5 things, like, what do you want to get out of the class? Usually it's a good grade. That's why they're there, and they're taking it because it's required or within a narrow range of electives. But then probably the most 2 insightful questions are, what are you most excited about for the class? And what are you most concerned about? And it's like, oh, okay, well, that's what I need to address to maybe alleviate some of those fears that they have. It's not as bad as they think it's, whatever, so. It's what's they think, like, I'm just not good with biology. I don't expect you to be when you start. You're gonna learn it. That is insightful. And then, I learned something from, Kim Irvin in a course that I've been taking from her online about, getting feedback at the end of the semester that would be helpful for other students in the future. So she calls it the wisdom wall in an online course. Just use a discussion post or topic to say, okay, what would you tell students coming in this class that they should know? And, I've had a few students do it so far this semester. I'll be able to share that advice with other students. Hopefully it will help them.
Another activity that I've done for students in my research and writing class is I've had them write a letter to their past selves at the beginning of the semester. What would you tell yourself to do differently this semester? And then I scan it and send it to them, delay send, so that it appears at the first of the next semester. I've only had 2 students ever respond to me, thank you. I don't know how it lands. I don't know if this goes into a void.
That's a great idea.
Okay.
That's cool.
Has anyone used Kahoot in a meaningful, productive way? I was just curious, because that's a resource that's out there for us, that has been encouraged by some people to be used, and then just trying to figure out how it's can be really useful. I didn't find it hugely effective when I tried to do it.
I think it's fun as you can use it as a sort of like a bell ringer, or just to get things going, or as a review. At the end of the semester, I think that's, in the past, I haven't used it in a while. In the past, when I've used it, that's I've used it for a review.
I use it a little bit, and usually, well, I get a few students who really like the competitive nature of it. They get excited about that. But I actually use it just as practice for things that we just learned. Because I know students will always confuse positive and negative reinforcement and positive and negative punishment. So I just create a bunch of examples, like 15 examples, and they'll, by the time they get through those, hopefully most of them are getting it right. But so I pause and I talk about why they're correct or not. And so in some cases, I normally would just do that on a mobile device with the whole audience fully.
Yeah.
But I mean, does the same exact thing, but for some people, the competition kind of gets them more excited about it. I don't get any prizes or anything.
Could probably also use it to kind of assess how well the lesson went too, you know, like, is there something I need to maybe cover a little better next time or go into more detail about? The students didn't seem to do that.
Yeah, there's, very simple, you can do that, just, what do I call it, the end of this class check.
Yeah. Oh, no.
Yeah, it's, there's a name for it, but basically is, you ask them to write down, what was the most
Exit
important?
exit.
Yeah, yeah.
Excellent.
And like. All right, so let's talk a little bit about, assessment of student learning. Any creative methods out there of assessment?
I'm not a professor, but I was of the mindset of like, I don't know, like, how do you not grade? Like, in the section when they were talking about that, I'm like, great, like, how do I, so, well, like the CBE that the schools are doing now, I'm totally fine with 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 4, got it. My husband hates it, but now when we get to the college setting, and I'm like, how do you grade? Like, how would you give I don't know, like, I was of that mindset in that section.
Yeah, that's tough. I mean, you can grade for completion, meeting some criteria. To complete it or not. I was thinking something really radical last night, which was, instead of making all of my quizzes count for something, I'll just call them practice for the final exam. And then I'll just make you spill it out all, you know, on paper in the classroom during the final exam to see what you've actually learned. Because I remember my physiology professor in college, the final exam entirety was describe all the physiological changes that took place from the time you woke up until the time you took this test, or while you're taking this test. So I just had to tell everything that I knew about physiology. That was, that's creative, I guess. Talk about what you know.
I think part of the challenge is, I mean, because students have been, you know, graded in some form or another all the way along. Like if you did that, for example, with the quizzes, I think there would certainly be at least a significant number of students who are like, well, he doesn't even take a grade on it, so I'm not going to bother to do it.
Yeah.
And that's, you know, you're kind of, you're stuck either way, because if you grade it, people will not necessarily do well on it. But if you don't grade it, they won't do it at all. So, yeah, I don't know where the answer lies, but yeah, it's definitely, I mean, I think that it's hard to change assessment, you know, totally, because as you said, I mean, how do we know they're getting anything out of it? There has to be some way. Don't know what that way is, but.
I had a professor once who gave us a study guide that ended up being all the questions on the exam. And when we walked in the door, he gave us 2 options. You can turn in your study guide or take the exam. And so for those of us like who actually put the time into doing the study guide, we're like, yes. And it was a very small class. My one friend who didn't was like, well, I just knew I knew it. He's like, but I can't leave. I'm like, great, you know it, just sit down and take it. And he was so angry at that option, but that professor was like, if you took this time to answer every single question and write it out, like, I know you're retaining something. So turn in your study guide, and if you didn't do the study guide, here's the exam. So that was one way to ensure we truly were looking at the information and give the different types of learners the opportunity to do it their way.
What about the one method where students give their own grade? Like, I think I deserve. A B.
So I have asked students on particular assignments, what grade do you think you deserve? And I think for most of our students at EIU, they would give themselves much lower grades than I would give them. Yes, and then there's the occasional student who has an inflated idea of doing, but.
I would be interested if they were given the rubrics ahead of time. Like not just, you know, okay, here's the grade, but here's the standards, here's the expectations.
Yeah.
Like based off of that, giving like say that full guide
Mhm.
and seeing how they would truly evaluate themselves.
Yeah.
Cause
that's
I
what
agree, I
did.
feel like I'd see a lot more that would give themselves Cs, but
Mhm.
the professors would be like, hey, what are you talking about?
Right.
Like just that. They're tougher on themselves than they need to be.
Yeah.
So there's this, I can't remember the name of the effect in psychology, but the students who typically do poorly have are least informed about their actual performance. Um, Can't remember the name.
That tracks.
Yeah,
Well, I mean, I think the no grading system depends on students really wanting to do the work, being engaged learners. And that gets back to the first part of the book. Like, how do we really motivate students to want to be here and to be invested in the time to do the thing without the carrot or the stick.
Dr. Farley, were you trying to say something to us?
Yes,
You
I
are mute.
was. Can you hear me?
Yes.
So I looked up the 2 universities that they mentioned in the book that did the grade yourself. And they were very truly small liberal arts universities that delivered liberal arts degrees that were very general. And when you looked at the majors, they were more project focused and it was more like discovery, and which is the beauty of, you know, a liberal arts degree. But neither one of those universities had any pre-professional that required a certification or licensure or anything like that attached to the degree.
Right.
So that makes a big difference if you have a whole university that you can do that with versus so many of like our clinical degrees, you have to take a licensure exam. So you can't just go grade yourself. Or, you know, and then to go on and get, you know, to get into medical school or PA school or nurse practitioner school, you have to have GPAs, and they're already frowning on the credit, no credit that happened during the pandemic. It's keeping, you know, students out of some of those programs just because it's so competitive that they have to have a way to separate students and determine if they're going to be successful. So that's all I wanted to say.
Yeah. No,
yeah, it is. And as many of you may know, there has been a white paper distributed on campus about grading, credit, no credit, or pass fail, I should say. Which, you know, if you look at the studies that show students are still high performing despite pass fail grades, it's because they have licensure examinations at the end. I mean, you're looking at medical school students who still have to pass their boards, and so they're still highly motivated to do very well. And so the samples in those studies are kind of unique, I guess, in that way. And, you know, maybe we have some experience with the pandemic ourselves, knowing, you know, what do students aim for if they know that's an option. And some of the other studies that I've looked at do show that not only does it hurt students, well, they perform lower. I mean, so they take students who have the option of pass or fail, that don't know it until after their grades are in. I think that's, no, maybe it's, anyway, at some point they say, well, you basically shoot for what you perform according to what minimum is. And unfortunately, it also hurts their subsequent GPAs. They don't do as well in future graded courses. So, yeah, we did have some experience with credit, no credit.
under really bad circumstances where the instructors were not prepared to help students with it. And I feel like credit, no credit could work. Maybe not for the pre-professional programs, but it could work in areas where you've already sort of scaffolded, like what do students absolutely have to do to demonstrate learning in this area? And I think project-based learning could be really helpful there. It really work, but
Yeah, I'm not saying, I'm not completely opposed to it.
yeah.
In limited situations, it might be useful, so.
I tell my advisors all the time, I pass failed one of my bios to survive. Because I'm not a bio brain, I hate it, it's the worst thing ever in my life, I don't understand it. It's like a Rorschach painting to me, I don't understand anything. But at my school, a million years ago, you were allowed to do pass fail on 2 classes in your academic career. And so whether that's something where there's that type of limitation, or you can only use it in gen ed courses and not courses specific to your degree or something like that, it could be something that would, give someone a lifeline that, they're drowning and they have to take biology to graduate from the IU. Or they have to take fine arts and they are a science brain, and it's a completely foreign concept. So it could offer a lifeline to the gen ed portion of the well-rounded education that those brains just don't necessarily fit with. So it would be giving them a chance without just wiping the slate clean in a larger sense.
And I think with education, our GPAs are higher because of teacher licensure, so they have to have a certain GPA to get into those sequential courses. So when that happened, there was a lot of kids that really benefited by having that credit and not the C, because the C drives their GPAs down. And so if they just had credit, it does help keep them above. So when they get, because I see a lot, especially early childhood, for some reason, they struggle in the gen eds. And so when they get to ELE classes, in the most time they're making A's and B's. But if they can't get to the 2.65 in the gen eds, then they don't really have that luxury to get into the E. But we do that because we don't want them at the end and not be able to get licensure because they have to have that GPA. So that I did see that helping them in COVID, where they could choose credit, no credit into that, and that wouldn't affect their GPA. And they were kind of right on the line. So it'd be interesting to see like 1 or 2, not everything, but 1 or 2 classes.
And I had one student who didn't take the credit, no credit option, kept the grade. And had they not done that, had they taken credit, they would have had a high enough GPA to get into our master's program. But because they didn't make the cut for that particular program. So it was like, they didn't take the advantage of it because they were gonna go with the grade and then ended up not. It hurt them later.
And I think it was really hard with that part is because we didn't really know. I mean, it was kind of given to us at the end, and I think one part you had to pick before they came out, and other times you could go back. So it was all different.
After something like that.
It was all different. It was so confusing.
Yeah.
And so that was just the pandemic and having the differences, but then they were all like, can I have credit, no credit? And I'm like, no, we're done with that.
Well, and I had some of the opposites with the student population. Some of them that I worked with elected to do the credit, no credit to quote, protect their GPA. And then afterwards found out that it would have actually helped their GPA because they did well. And I was like, well, I told all of my students because of the clinical aspect and licensure and acceptance, like, don't do it unless you know you are failing. Don't do it. And they did anyways. I'm like, I'm sorry.
Because they thought they were getting.
Because they thought they
C.
were getting, no, they thought they were getting a B. They wanted to protect their 3.8. I'm like, well, you earned an A, it would have taken you up. And what a blessing to have that problem. But you have on all ends of the spectrum that issue of sometimes you need to see how you perform in order to trust your own assessment. Because they will undercut themselves when they are so brilliant and do such great work.
I think we also see a lot of type As that are that very not, you know, imposter syndrome or whatever, and then they're really good and they're 4.0 with kids, like, I'm gonna be good. What, you know, just trust yourself that it's okay to, you know, to do that, but they don't, they're like. But you get both, and then you get the other people that are.
And that's why I think just having a credit, no credit policy is not going to be a solution to the problem, right? Because we have to rethink how we're teaching, if we're incorporating that into the way, but although like what you said is an indication that credit, no credit would really help with the intellectual risk taking.
But I think not everything, because then you can't see, I mean, the individual teachers can see, but you can't see coming out kind of where they are level wise. And you know what, I don't know, I think that's, you know, I always tell my trying to get, if you wanna go grad school, you need to really get a 3, you have a 3 or above. And so if that was all no credit, then they would, you couldn't see that where that would be.
And I know that I learned recently, and I've been here 24 years, that we do have a credit, no credit policy in our catalog, which is pretty restrictive about how it can be used. And so I know the president is mindful of maybe making it a little more flexible. That might help with retention of freshmen, sophomore students.
Something else that I think we can talk about for classroom culture that kind of extend slightly beyond with the pandemic, right? There was not an opportunity to get people in a room to take a college entrance exam, and thus we end up in a position where we're test optional. I think it forced us maybe to reconsider what we're getting from tests. And I've been in higher ed for 23, 24 years, and I've always heard admissions folks tell me I care more about the high school GPA than an SAT, ACT score, because you can have one good day on a test, but a high school GPA tells me your day in, day out. But of course, the other side with the pandemic, high school GPAs now mean nothing because of pass fail, because of we're going to let you extend the deadline. We're going to just, you know what, we'll just skip that assignment for you. It gets into a weird, we may see a pendulum swing back the other way where we're saying like, we need some kind of way to just sort this out quickly, right? Like we are drawn to stratification and having some sense of order, but.
And I think the students are struggling with that in mind, because they have a licensure test that they have to that. Before student teaching, they've never had a high stake test before like that. And I have people in my office crying because they've taken it 3 or 4 times, and they're smart. I mean, they have really high GPAs here, but I'm like, you gotta get that weight off. You gotta not second guess, because they're thinkers, you know. Some of them are thinkers and they think through the test, and if you overthink the test, you're gonna get thrown because it's tricky. So to have that, but not really have a high stake test before that, because they can take the ACT and the SAT, but it really, you know.
That is an indication of like the whole system needs to be rethought, because if the student has gone through a program successfully, why do they need to take a content test? Our history content test is like a trivia quiz on world history, and the students understandably don't do well, right? Because
Elementary
how do
is
you prepare for
everything.
that?
They're like, they asked me about all of them. One of them was like, what is the best, what was the most popular music in the 17th century? And they're like, how do you know that?
Well, that's part of it too, because I remember when I had to take the school psychology certification test, there were some questions on there that like, well, when you think about it, like, this is how I would have played this, but then I got the question wrong, because whoever created the test, you know, Pearson, whoever thought the answer should be different. And so I remember several of us thinking, like, in my cohort, like, well, this is how I answered that question, and we all have the same idea.
And I have to say, it's not real world. You have to think about what is there laws that are in here, we go through. I had one of my students come, she passed it the first time. I'm like, well, how did you pass it? She goes, I thought what an old government right. And then, and I put it down. I love that. Like, oh, there you go.
Level thing.
And I get laughs out of my other students that come in because I tell them that story and they laugh. I'm like, okay, you just gotta let that go. It's okay. We can get through this, but ooh, it's real, it's been a real struggle. It's really been since the pandemic. They suspended having to pass it before student teaching, and that just came back in the fall. And so that was a real, like, because nobody had believed, I kept telling them, you have to pass before student teaching, they're like, no, and then it was like, you have to pass. So actually this spring was the first time they had to do that, and so this is the second round, and
And it's kind of interesting, that entire concept right now, they're professions, right? Nursing, we want our nurses to get it right on the first time. We know that sometimes there's an opportunity for consultation, right? But sometimes it is literally a moment of life and death. We need something to happen right now, and it has to be the right thing. But I know in my profession, if I don't know the answer, no one's going to die in that moment. If I say, you know what, I don't know that. Let me call the registrar's office. Let me call financial aid. Let me talk to the faculty member, right? And I think that's a more realistic representation of many professions, is that it is helpful to have access to that knowledge, to have been exposed to it, but you probably have a book, a manual, a catalog, something that you're going to consult. The more important thing is the critical thinking. How do you apply? And
I think that's like education in K through 12 is there, and there's lots of laws right now that are in Springfield to try to figure out how to do. So is our program good enough? Can we put out really good teachers, but how do we compare that with other programs? And having a state, it's even 30 years ago, I had to take the state test in Texas, and then came here and had to take another state test. So how do we change that? We're having kids that have really good GPAs, are gonna be great teachers, and they're not being able to pass the test because of, and test anxiety is a huge thing. Like it really does tell, it really does affect them.
And last thing I'll say about the content test, if you look at the history standards for 7 through 12, it's all about inquiry, analyzing primary sources, and then you give them a trivia test, and if they don't pass it, then they can't be a teacher.
I always tell them, this is not best practices. This is not what we teach you to do. This is totally different, which is silly, like, yeah.
I know for admissions exams, since I got here and looked at our performance, I have these students with brilliant GPAs and terrible admissions test scores for the MCAT, the DAT. And I started talking to students, and while I don't want them to be focused on this part, but just as important as content knowledge is test taking strategy and preparation. And I think they don't get that anymore in K through 12, like preparing to take the test. Like I encourage all of them, I compare it to either performing arts or athletics. Like, okay, which one do you relate to more? Great. You love band. Would you ever sight read music in front of 1,000 people? No. Like, so why would you go take your admissions test for the first time without actually having sat down and done a lot of them? Like, do you even sight read the full song the first time? No, you break it down. You practice over and over, and then you add in the other instruments and you build, and it's teaching them how to pick something apart in order to rebuild it. Because I don't think they come in with that skill very much. And so, no, I don't tell them just always pick B or that type of test strategy, but there is a strategy to preparing yourself to being in an environment similar to what you're gonna face. Because we do need some type in the clinical healthcare setting, some type of assessment to make sure they can do it. But I do think that being able to break down something to build back up to meet the end is lost a lot of times, and that's what we could help them with.
Now we've reached 4 o'clock. Dr. Stoll is our guide on the side. Is there anything that you would like to say to kind of summarize what amount of radicalism that we've covered today?
Yeah, well, maybe if I just conclude with one final future thought is, how do we develop those skills of inquiry, critical thinking, evaluation, because the world is changing in a way that makes it almost impossible to tell the difference between truth and error. a student can type in a prompt to ChatGPT, but they don't yet have the knowledge to properly evaluate
Yeah.
the information. So I'm trying to kind of move forward in a way that ultimately might help with that evaluation process. I haven't figured it out yet, but I see that as one of the future challenges, in being creative in the way that we engage our students to prepare them for the world that we now live in.
And I can share a brilliant thing that Dr. Tim Taylor is doing over in the English department with the English placement essay for incoming students. He's no longer just giving them a prompt and saying, write about this prompt. He's giving them a prompt, what someone else wrote about it, and say, now you write about what that person wrote, because you're not going to be able to find that on Google. You're not going to be able to get ChatGPT to crank that out for you. And I think you have to think about those kind of things. You're right. Like you have to. We have another one of these next week, same bat time and bat channel, or maybe Panther time and Panther channel. Our speaker is not confirmed yet. I have a volunteer. We'll shore it up, but we will be talking about the people, I believe it is next of the institution. I don't know. Whoever it is, it will happen next week. I'll get an email out. I thank you all for joining. We had about 20 people total today across in person and in Zoom, and so we really appreciate it. Thanks.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you.
You know, the city